I want to welcome everyone to our July Pecan Topics meeting. And we have a couple of speakers today. Dr. Mulder is going to be talking about weevil and late season insects. And this is actually going to be his last pecan Zoom before he retires in August. And then Dr. Zhang is going to be visiting with us about pecan development and the importance of water to how those pecans are developing in the summer. And so she's got some good information on how pecans develop and how they fill out properly. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if everything will work for me today. And I want to just start with talking a little bit about what we need to be thinking about this month. So we've got several things on the calendar that we still need to be thinking about. But one of the important topics for July is looking at your nutrition and what you need to fertilize with this coming spring. So we're going to be taking leaf samples, and I'll explain how to do that just in a little bit. There was also a really great article in Pecan South magazine. Dr. Charlie Graham from Noble wrote an article about leaf sampling. It's very detailed and has some great information in that this last month. And then we need to also be thinking about still conserving our moisture. So maybe controlling our weeds, keeping our herbicide strips clean, or taking care of some of those weeds like pigweed and mare's tail that may be sending out lots of seeds at this time of the year, and continuing to mow in some of our areas. We need to be thinking about irrigation. And I know many of you have had plenty of water, but when we dry out, or if we dry out anytime soon, we'll need to be thinking about supplemental irrigation coming up. And at the research station, we're kind of in a pinch. We've got some of our irrigation is repaired after the ice damage, but some of it is still not operable. So they're going to be working hard to get that going back up pretty soon. And then we want to look at our crop load for the orchard and see what it looks like, and if we might need to be thinking about doing some crop load management or thinning that crop either the end of this month or the first part of August. And we'll concentrate more on that in our August Zoom. But we're going to be mechanically thinning those fruits if we have more fruits on those trees than they can actually ripen properly. And so we look at those nuts and we monitor the stage they're in. And so we want to thin them when they're have to fully expanded on that kernel. And so when they're in the water stage. So we'll talk about that a little bit more next month. We need to look at soil drainage. Some of you may have really wet areas in your orchard. Might want to go ahead and clean out some of those drainage ditches or make some drainage pathways where that water can run off of your orchard area. We want to continue our insect control, and Phil's going to be talking about that in just a little bit. But we also need to continue monitoring our disease problems. And I'll show you a few maps of what some of our scab hours look like this year. And then also we want to continue with our zinc sprays. And for those trees that were not damaged by ice or other things, and they kind of slow their growth, we usually stop our zinc applications in July. But those that have had a lot of ice damage, we may want to continue a little bit further into the summer and just cover those new leaves. And then, so how do things look at the research station? So we've got a few pictures here of 3 different cultivars that we've got at the station. We've got our Merrimack. You can see a little bit of sawfly feeding on the leaves, and we see that pretty often at the research station, but it's not too critical that we have to control it. Then our Pawnee, they're developing well and have a big crop on the branches that are left. We have a lot of Pawnee fruits. Kansas not as, the crop load's not as great. There's a lot of vegetative shoots in there, but the Kansas are developing as well. So everything looks to be doing pretty well. We're going to go ahead and we've talked about what we need to be thinking about. Here's what the pecans were looking like. We've got ice damage recovery, the June regrowth, and I showed this picture last month, and you can see how in just this week everything is filling out a lot more. We're getting that growth is developing. We're getting longer shoots, and a lot more shoots are developing as well. And so we'll have to be watching that through the season, but everything seems to be regrowing really well. One thing that is a little concerning for a lot of areas of the state is our scab infections. And so I want to remind you that a scab hour is 1 hour with a relative humidity of 90% or higher. And then also it has to have air temperature of 70 degrees or higher. And we've had a lot of conditions that meet those criteria, and more so than normal for our areas especially. And so how many hours of scab infections or how many hours do we need, scab hours, for an infection to occur? Well, it depends on what type of pecans you're growing. So for those highly susceptible varieties, things like Wichita, Western, Squirrel, those type, they only need about 10 scab hours before they start having some infection on those nuts or leaves. And then for those that are moderately susceptible, they're going to need about 20 hours. And then those that are resistant or low susceptible, maybe 30 scab hours until we start seeing some infection. Well, if we look at the map for the last 14 days, this is pretty dramatic. And so it's a little hard to see. I'm sorry, because it is smaller, but you can see we have areas that have close to 100 hours just in the last 2 weeks. Normally that's pretty common down here in McCurtain County and some of these counties in the very southeastern part of the state, but not this extensive, widespread across the state. And so we may have issues having a lot of more scab showing up on our pecans. So people need to be considering fungicide sprays if they're not already doing them, because they may be in bad shape if they haven't been spraying at all. Now, if you look at, this is the total hours for since March 1st. And so this is what you'd normally expect. We would have a lot more down in the southeastern corner, but the last couple of weeks it's been widespread. And so if you look at those numbers, they're very high compared to out at the Panhandle, because this area is much more humid and warmer most of the time. This is dry and hot as well, but we don't have the same humidity levels. So we don't see scab usually in this western part of the state. It's more of an eastern problem. And then, so if we take a look at the 3-year average for scab at Pecans, kind of in the central part of the state, we don't have a lot of issues with scab at the research station because we are on a hill and have a lot of wind flow. But you can see this is the green one is the 2021, so we've stopped right here. The red is 2019 and the blue is 2020. And so you can see green, we are higher than we have been the last couple of years. And it's probably trending to at least stay with this 2019 year, or maybe even higher. But when we look at other areas like down in Broken Bow, maybe, it is higher than it was back in this time frame, but it's not quite as maybe as dramatic. But you can see it is still quite high, and these numbers are much higher than what the Pecans was showing. Now, if you look at somewhere where you normally don't think about it being very many scab areas developing, like Hollis, which is in the southwestern part of the state, it's much more dramatic. So you can see this is over 100 hours for Hollis very early in the season, where, you know, most years we don't even get that high all year long. So those growers that are growing things like Western and Wichita in the southwestern part of the state may be having a lot of issues with scab. And then this is another thing that we've been seeing some around the state. We've got feeding on some of our limbs, and we've got it looks like they're defoliating some of these branches. In some trees, it's entire branches are being defoliated, and it's actually bagworms. And bagworms usually aren't much of a pest on pecans, but the last couple of years we've seen them feeding on them. Usually we see them on cedar and bald cypress and other things, but they'll feed on other trees as well. And this year has been just a pretty intense year for bagworm on some crops. So we are seeing those. Now, if the growers treated for pecan nut chase bear, they may not have this issue, but if they haven't treated, they may be having problems with bagworms, as well as webworms and some other things. So I wanted to talk about monitoring for your nutrition, looking at leaf sampling to know how much fertilizer you need to apply next season. And so normally if we look at soil testing, it's just going to give us kind of a pre-plant basis for our nutrition. Before we plant our trees, we want to take a soil sample so we can look at the pH, the phosphorus, and the potassium, and then amend those to the soil if we need to. But sometimes what it says is in the soil is not actually available to the tree. And so we want to look at leaf sampling so we can know exactly what that tree is able to take up and utilize for the growth. And so it measures exactly what's in the tissue. We have to follow the lab criteria to make sure that we have really accurate results. And that means following the directions that are laid out in our fact sheets. And then we're asking the lab maybe that you're going to be submitting how they want their samples submitted. And then we want to look for how those trees are performing based on what the elements they're able to use. And it's a good way to look at the overall health of the orchard and look at the trends, the ups and downs in some of these elements, these nutrients, and how they're using those through the season or over several years' time. We may want to take a soil sample every 3 to 5 years, but it's good to take a leaf sample every year or every other year to kind of monitor what we need to apply for our fertilizer needs for that next season. So when and what do we sample? We want to begin our leaf sampling process the 3rd season on our trees. So if we plant year 1 and year 2 and year 3, we're going to fertilize by a schedule, by a set rate. On that year 3 in July, we will start taking leaf samples to know how much to fertilize for that 4th season. And so sampling in July is critical. If we sample out of that time frame, it's not going to be accurate results. So we look for our current season's growth, and we find the middle leaf. Remember, pecans have compound leaves. So these are our leaves. The entire thing is a leaf, and these are leaflets. So we find the middle leaf on that new growth. So this would be the middle leaf. And then we would collect the middle pair of leaflets off of that middle leaf. And we want to collect off sun-exposed shoots. We don't want to collect off things that are water sprouts or really interior shaded shoots. We want to get ones that are nice and exposed to the sunlight. We want to collect about 50 pair of these leaflets, and we want to collect from representative areas of the orchard. So if you have areas of native pecans and varieties, you want to separate those separate. If you have big blocks of different cultivars, separate those into different samples as well. So maybe you have a sample of Pawnee and a sample of Kansas to submit separately. If you have different soil types, you'd want to separate those out as well. Anything that's very different, you want to collect a sample for each of those different areas. If the trees are not healthy, you wouldn't want to collect healthy and stressed trees into that same sample as well. But 50 pair of leaflets, and it sounds like it would take a long time, but it really doesn't, to go randomly through the orchard and collect those leaflets. And then before they start to wilt, we want to go ahead and rinse them off. You don't want to soak the leaves, but rinse them off carefully, maybe less than a minute, rinsing any kind of residue or dust, any spray residue that may be left on those leaves. If you're spraying zinc, if you don't wash them off, you may have skewed results in your sample. So rinse them off, dry them, air dry them, store them in a paper bag or in a like a forage bag from the extension office, and then submit them to your county extension office, or there's other labs that will accept tissue samples from pecans. And then make sure that you designate if it is a native or improved cultivar, because the recommendations can be quite different. The cost of analysis here in Oklahoma is $20 if they're submitted to OSU. And this fact sheet, HLA 6232, Fertilizing Pecan and Fruit Trees, goes through and talks about all the process and how to do that properly for your samples. I just wanted to show you this is the leaf, and then we find the middle pair. We just bend those backwards and they snap off really easily in a pair. So we want to include that attachment from the leaflet and just include that into your sample. We don't need the rest of this leaf, just those couple pair of leaflets. We only want to take one pair of leaflets off of each shoot. We don't want to take multiples off of one shoot. Just wanted to announce our 2020 State Pecan Show results. We had Best in Show was exhibited by Ray Purdy out of Kay County. It was a Pawnee, and it was 58.3% kernel, which means that if you 58% of that sample was kernel meat and the other was shell and packing material, which is a good number. The higher the number, the more kernel meat per sample. And then it had 43.1 nuts per pound. So that gives us the size of the nut. Champion native was a big red native exhibited by Joe Isle of Creek County. And it was 56% kernel with 77.2 nuts per pound. And then the highest percent kernel was a Peruke nut that was exhibited by Dick Hoffman of Payne County, and it was 60.4% kernel, so very high percentage of nut meat. Then the largest pecan was a Mohawk, also exhibited by Dick Hoffman of Payne County, and it had 32.9 nuts per pound, so fairly large size pecan. Doesn't take very many to get a pound of pecans on a Mohawk. Want to remind you of the upcoming Zooms. We have one on August 6th, September 10th, and then October 8th, and you'll need to register each time. All right, and there's my contact information if you need to get in touch with me. And then I will stop sharing. And do we have any questions for about anything that I discussed on that presentation? Anything in the chat, or you can unmute and ask a question as well. Catherine, did you have a question?
Yes, on the bagworm infestation, where
Yes.
is that showing up prominently in the state?
I think it's everywhere, but the few questions that I'm getting in the office is from the northeastern counties, Claremore, Skytook, in that area. There's been quite a few. Those growers were from the Skytook area that had sent me those pictures.
Thank you.
I've even got them on my young pecans.
Mm-hmm. I've seen them on fruit trees, grapes, everything this year, so that it's pretty widespread.
Okay.
But they're bagworms, not webworms.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Don't confuse the two.
No, I have them on my small trees down here in Ardmore as well. So
just ideal conditions, I guess, for them this season. And last year we had a lot as well. So Phil, if they're not taking care of them this year, will that increase the numbers again for that area next season, or does it depend on a lot of other factors?
It's a possibility that if they're not controlled well this year, because the females live their entire life within the bags, and they will lay their eggs in the bags, and then the young larvae start to hatch out, and sometimes you won't even see those young larvae. They're so tiny, but then they start to grow, and then they start to accumulate that bag material, that leaf material and twig material all around their bodies, and you'll start to see chewed up areas. And that's what I'm seeing in my young orchard. But then I just made I think it was my second or third, because I was behind, but I made my second or third zinc application yesterday, and I included a little confirm in that application to take care of bagworms.
Yeah, that'll be good. Phil, do you want to go ahead and share your screen and see if yours is going to work better for you than mine?
I don't know. That remains to be seen. Let's see.
So I've done this a million times, and I'm not sure why it's giving me fits lately. So.
Okay. Can you see mine?
Yep. Do your presentation mode and.
Okay. How's that?
Switch your screens, display settings.
To swap presenter view. There, how's that?
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about pecan weevil and aphid update. This is something that I covered at the OPGA meeting, and I thought, this is what we really need to cover with my last presentation for this year. But we can talk about some other things as well, and bagworms was one of them that was obviously near and dear to my heart. I picked several of those bagworms off, and you could just simply pick them off, but that won't necessarily deter them from continuing the onslaught that's going on out there. So, okay, so our main focus is pecan weevil. Pecan weevil is usually stirred up by a heavy rain that causes the soil to become moist, and then that's the cue for the adult weevils to begin emerging from the soil, because they've spent anywhere from 2 to 3 years in the soil. And so they emerge after a heavy rainfall. We've had our share of heavy rainfalls this year, but the one that's probably coming up to maybe even probably later, if we are fortunate enough to get another rain after the July rainfalls subside, those are the ones we really have to watch out for. So when those pecans are really susceptible is when they're in the dough stage. So when you can no longer really cut through that pecan and the water starts to fall out of the pecan as you cut through it. It doesn't matter what way you cut through it, but what direction, unless you're looking to see the pecan development. But if you still get water in there, any of those pecans that are fed on by the adult weevils, which amounts to about 1 nut every 4 days, it's not a significant amount. So I wouldn't really worry about adult feeding. What we're really concerned about is the egg laying, the oviposition that's going to be occurring. So about 85% of the adult weevils orient to the trunk after emerging from the soil. And it's likely that most of the population crawls up the tree trunk, and about 10% may fly directly into the canopy. So we are trying to monitor for the ones that are flying or crawling up the tree trunk, but you can't just treat the tree trunk, because there's a small population that flies directly into the canopy. The weevils begin to emerge from the soil after a heavy rainfall in August and peaks in September in Oklahoma and ends as late as mid-October. Now that's a key message here, because we've had growers that have sort of ignored the weevil late in the season because they haven't seen very many, or maybe they treated one time and then they didn't see very many after that, and they get burned by a late emergence, usually brought on, and I say usually, but not always, usually brought on by a drought delay. So we haven't seen much in terms of a drought delay this year. So that all remains to be seen, but we can get weevils into mid-October, and it's happened before, and it's burned a couple of our growers that have taken off or given up on weevil management late in the season. They feed on nuts, as I said, in the water stage, but those nuts will naturally abort and they'll fall from the tree. Nuts in the late gel to really in the dough stage primarily are suitable for egg laying, and the females lay about 15 to 30 nuts over her lifetime, and she'll put anywhere from 2 to 4 eggs in each nut. The larvae feed for about 30 days and destroy the kernel. They chew an exit hole and fall to the ground. And they burrow into the soil about 4 to 12 inches deep. Now, they have been found shallower than that, and they've been found much deeper than that. But that pretty much gives you an idea of where they are during that 2 to 3 year non-growing period, because they're really not doing much of anything during that time. They're not feeding on roots. They're not feeding on plant material underneath the pecan tree. They actually slow down their metabolism by 8 times. So they're really just almost in a suspended animation for a while. The larvae feed for about 30 to 42 days up on the tree or in the nut maybe after it's fallen from the ground, maybe not. But they will destroy the entire kernel. You could see the eggs there in that middle shot that are laid inside where the nut meat is. You could see the hole where the female on the left picture, you can see the hole where the female put her chewing mouth parts, even though it looks like a straw. She put her chewing mouth parts, made that hole, and then she took her claws and worked a circle around there until she was able to chew into the actual shell, and then turns around and oviposits or starts laying her little eggs inside the actual nut meat. And those larvae feed for about that 40-day period, 30 to 40 days, totally destroying the kernel. Now, obviously, if you're in a retail situation, you don't want a customer to see any of that. So we need to control this. The larvae then exit the nut after feeding and fall to the ground. We talked about that. They burrow into the soil 4 to 12 inches deep. It's too late at that point to salvage the kernel or prevent larval emergence. So if in 1 year you see a bunch of nuts like this picture on the right with these small, perfectly symmetrical holes in it, you can be assured that that is pecan weevil, and you've got a serious problem. And you certainly don't want to get that into a retail market. So common questions that I've gotten over the years include things like, can I kill the larvae after they enter the soil? And sort of the common answers to these questions is, yeah, if you could tell me what the chemical concentration is going to be when you apply something on the soil and you get it to the target site, maybe. And then you've got to time it just right. And do they all enter the soil together? And the answer to that is no. And the real drawback is that the weevil has a almost impenetrable cell that it will, and we'll see this in just a moment, but it has an almost impenetrable cell that the chemical will not go through. Okay, so a lot of things kind of working against you if you're trying to control the weevil either in the larval stage or the adult stage by treating the ground. And we've treated the ground up to a 4x rate and gotten very little results because of several of those factors. If you wait until spring and drench the soil with enough chemical, can you wait during that time and cause mortality? Chances are unlikely because of that earthen cell that the larva and the subsequent pupal stage and adult stage will occur. Can I treat the soil under the canopy before, during, or after adult weevils begin to emerge? Once again, there's a timing issue. Then there's a cost and the number of applications that you would have to make. What we're really trying to direct our application for, if you have weevil problems, and most everybody does, is to time it so that you've got the adults in the tree and you're treating that tree as close to the dough stage as possible. So it's one of pecan maturity, but it's also one of, do you have a population of weevils in the tree? And we're going to talk about those here in just a minute. Now, is it possible that, and this is another question I've gotten over the years, is it possible that an eradication program similar to the boll weevil program could work for this insect? And I guess the unfortunate part about it is pecans are widespread and native to Oklahoma. They're not grown just in your orchard. They occur on every creek bank, river bank. They're just native to the whole state. So if they can't find a suitable host, being the pecan nut itself, if they can't find a suitable host in that tree, they will fly to the next available tree, which might be in your orchard. So those are some of the common questions that I've gotten over the years. So they'll spend 2 to 3 years in the soil. The larvae will create an almost impenetrable earthen cell, and they'll pupate after 1 year. So that's that pupal stage on the right in 90% of the population. Or they will pupate after 2 years in 10% of the population, and subsequently turn into adults in about 2 to 3 weeks after they pupate. But they still won't emerge until the following year. So it's a 2 to 3 year cycle. So from the time they enter the soil to their emergence as adults, it takes 2 to 3 years. And it'd be great if they all came out in 1 year, but unfortunately they don't cooperate. So treatment consideration should be based on cost per acre. And I want to caution about this because there are some folks that still use 7, and 7 is a viable choice, 7 insecticide. We used to have a product called 780S, and we no longer, I can't find it at least, but now they're using 7XLR, and that will run you about 67 to 60 a gallon. So your cost per acre could be anywhere from 33.80 to 84.50. And if we look at the various lambda cyhalothrin formulations, usually it's a one pound material. It's about $62 per gallon. So that'll cost you about $1.21 to $2.48 per acre. That's pretty cheap to get really good pecan weevil control. And that's just material costs. Weevil timing is quite variable depending upon moisture. Therefore, it's best to trap on indicator trees. So use those varieties that are in your orchard that are very early or that are on sandier soils, because the sandier soil is easier to emerge from for that weevil. Now, depending upon the management history, it may take up to 4 applications in one season. It's sort of variable depending upon how well that particular orchard has been taken care of. I think most of the time at Pecans, because that orchard is well taken care of, they make about 2 applications on average. But if you're inheriting an orchard, or if you bought an orchard that has been out of management for quite a while, it may take up to 4 applications to get the populations of pecan weevil under control. Okay, other control considerations. If you make pyrethroid applications like the lambda cyhalothrin or any of the pyrethroids early enough in the season, like in August, early September, consider making that with an aphicide. The objective here is to keep the leaves on the tree as long and late as possible. Remember, the longer you can keep those leaves on the tree, not only does it help you for this year, but it helps with fruit set the subsequent year. So remember, fruit attacked by the weevil in the water stage will abort. And if you're an organic grower, or you really have organic aspirations in terms of your pecan management, pecan weevil management, you can go with a product called Grandivo WDG. This is a granule, wettable granule. It's very expensive, at least $30 for a 2-pound rate, and obviously 45 or so for a 3-pound rate. And the lowest rate on the label is 2 pounds. So you better be receiving a large premium, because you're going to be making anywhere from 2 to 4 applications. And if you contrast that $30 twice, which would be $60 per acre, versus the $1.21, that's a no-brainer for someone even that has never had an economics course. So 2 applications, that's just with 2 applications. So you can imagine what it would cost you with more applications. So we evaluated some of these products in 2019. We evaluated 2 traditional insecticides and the Grandivo, and we looked at 1 pecan cultivar Kansas at Cimarron Valley Research Station, 4 replications of 4 trees per treatment. And the first application was based on tree phenology. So we waited until that mid to late August period of time, which in this case was August 22, where we reached the doe stage and made our first application, regardless of what the weevil population was. Then we made our second application based on label recommendations and harvest interval. But in our particular case, what we recommend normally is that you have circle traps out and you make that second application based on the captures and circle traps. We never reached threshold, but the problem that we encountered was the harvest interval with some of the materials that we were testing. So we went ahead and when we got within that time frame for effective harvest interval, we went ahead and made a second application, and we mixed in an aphicide, aphicide PQZ at a 3 ounce per acre rate on September 10th. Now, during that time, we received 12.73 inches of rain in August and September, with 9.86 inches in August, which is highly unusual for Oklahoma, but it does happen. Damage by pecan weevil was assessed at harvest on 23 October. We collected a 5-gallon bucket sample of the center 2 trees within each treatment and in each replication, keeping in mind that this was replicated 4 times in that same orchard. After drying to 4.2% moisture, a 200 nut random sample was selected for visual evaluation of damage, involving hand cracking each nut and assessing it for weevil and or hickory shuckworm damage. And you can see, based on, these are the materials that we looked at: Menecto Pro, Warrior, Grandivo, and so on. And Grandivo at the 2-pound rate, Grandivo at the 3-pound rate. And the mean number of pecan weevils, no difference, no significant difference between any of the treatments and the untreated check. And the same with hickory shuckworm, no difference between any of the various treatments and the untreated check. Now, what this tells me, more than the fact that anything will do, that's not necessarily what it's telling me. Even though, you know, the percent or the mean number of pecan weevils was less than the Grandivo WDG at the 2-pound rate than it was at the 3-pound. These are not significant numbers. And the reason they're not significant numbers is because at the Pecans, at the Cimarron Valley Research Station, they do a very effective job of managing weevils each and every year. If you've got anywhere from 1 to 2 or 3% damage, that's pretty effective control. And even in the untreated check, we were only seeing 3% damage. So maybe if we'd have done this in a unmanaged orchard or one that had been unmanaged for a while, the differences might have been greater. The other thing that I'll convey to you is that in the Grandivo wettable granule formulation, they are now making a liquid Grandivo. We were scheduled to utilize that material last year, but with and actually had a trial set up, but actually got oversprayed. So we had to abandon that trial. And I hope that we'll be able to test it. Maybe somebody will be able to test it this year, but perhaps maybe next year down the road. If the Grandivo, because it is a living organism, what we're told is that the Grandivo liquid will have to be in a almost refrigerated or freezer type of environment if it's not utilized in that particular year. So you might want to pay attention to that when and if it becomes available, but that remains to be seen. Right now, the Grandivo WDG is available, but not the liquid formulation. Aphid management decisions should be based upon which species you have out there, the timing in relationship to the weevil population, and any beneficials that may be present. Now, what you see on your screen here on the left is the black margined aphid, which has the wings kind of laying out flat, versus the black aphid on your right, which has the wings laying out almost in a roof-like fashion. But it's obviously blackish in color to dark olive green, and the yellow margin or the black margin aphid has the yellow body similar to a regular yellow aphid. So those are the three species that we see. And we kind of lump the yellow aphids into one group. And we lump and the one that we really have to watch out for is the black aphid. And we'll see why in just a moment here. So you want to take into consideration those beneficial organisms and if they're occurring out there. And you want to see that the black aphid is not the one that you're really concerned about. This is a lady beetle larva here. They will help control aphids. And we want to time that in relationship to the weevil. We want to time any applications we make for aphids in relationship to weevil timing as well. The life cycle of aphids is pretty simple for the most part: egg, nymph, adult. And the overwintering stage is the egg stage, usually in bark crevices and anywhere it can find some areas to get protection from the elements. The nymphs hatch from eggs in March and migrate to emerging leaves. We can see damage, excuse me, we can see damage early in the season, but or at least some populations early in the season, especially when we have heavy rains like we've experienced early in the season and high humidities. But for the most part, the aphid populations really come on in the fall, or excuse me, in the late summer when it starts to get hot and dry. Birth to reproducing adults in the growing season can take as little as 7 days. So you can have multiple generations in one particular year. And the male and female forms appear in the fall, and female lays eggs that overwinter on the branches. So this is what we're looking at. We see the winged female alates. We see sometimes just the young that don't have any wings, or they maybe haven't reached that adult stage, that fully adult stage yet. And then you may see a black aphid, or you may see a parasitized black margined aphid. So don't mistake that one for a black aphid. Just because it's black may not mean it's look for the aphid to move, look for any kind of spotting near the site where that aphid is found, because the chlorotic spot, the reddening that you'll see oftentimes with aphids will be pretty obvious. Now, the damage from aphids obviously can reduce nut quality for that particular year, but more than anything else, it may reduce flowers for next year if it causes that early defoliation that we talked about. So the real purpose of controlling aphids is to keep that leaf or those leaves on the tree as long as you possibly can, so that you have a good fruit set for the following year. They also can provide fruit source for sooty mold because of the honeydew that aphids produce, and they can cause that premature defoliation that we talked about, affecting the bloom for next year. Dormant oil applications can do a good amount to help control overwintering stages to some extent, but coverage here is very, very important. So when we talked about dormant oil control for scale and early season insect management, it's also for aphid control. So keep in mind where they lay their eggs in those bark crevices. Limit the sprays of pyrethroids and other non-selective insecticides early in the season. So if you're not using dormant oil and you find out that you have some other pest that's cropped up early in the season, see if you can find a more selective insecticides that won't cause mortality in the natural enemy populations that are out there. The insecticide choices include carbine, closer, centric, movento, fulfill, and then pyrethroid products or combination products can work. The cost is variable, anywhere from $5 to $30 per acre. Commonly, they would use some sort of, at least in the last 10 years, they would use some sort of formulations of imidacloprid. And they had some resistance reported with that material. And so they stopped using it. Well, subsequently, some of these other materials came along, and now imidacloprid is actually can work again. And the message from that is chemical rotation. And most of these things will have a number on it. Okay, it's called an IRAC number, IRAC, Insecticide Resistance Action Committee. So the IRAC number tells you that if it's a 3, that's a pyrethroid. If it's a 1A, it's an organophosphate, so that if it's a different number and you have to make multiple applications, switch to another number. Don't use the same number. You don't even have to know what the active ingredient is. You should know that it's a good aphicide or not, and there's your list right there. But then that IRAC number tells you that you should rotate from that number to a different number, a totally different number. So be careful about that and make sure we've got enough products out there now. And this list actually should include that PQZ that I talked about using on the Weevil test. It does a good job as well. Aphid control, we also had a trial there at the Cimarron Valley Research Station in Pecans. We had a completely randomized design for each cultivar with 12 to 20 trees in each of the 4 treatments. We used silencer and carbine, 2 rates. We used silencer and Movento, 1 rate, silencer and closer, and silencer alone. And we incorporated, even though we don't have an untreated here, we considered our silencer alone as our untreated, just simply because we wanted to avoid compounding or confounding the test with weevil problems. So initial aphid infestations were assessed on August 13th and averaged around 20 aphids per compound leaf. However, pecan weevil infestations had begun in earnest, so we required a treatment of about 5 ounces of silencer on August 16th and 17th. Now, during the next 6 days, a total of 1.73 inches of rain fell, and aphid infestations absolutely exploded, and we'll see how much they exploded here in just a moment. Pecan weevil emergence did continue, though. Okay, from that August 24th through the end of the month, no rain occurred. Therefore, on August 30th and 31st, the following treatments were made. The various silencer with carbine at a higher rate, and the Movento and the closer and the silencer only. Silencer is a lambda cyhalothrin material, a pyrethroid material. Pre-treatment counts were taken on August 27th, 3 days before treatments were applied. The following treatment, 2, 9, and 14 days later, aphid counts were taken again, as before, by counting the number of aphids per compound leaf on 10 randomly chosen leaves, both high in the tree and low in the tree, of 8 trees within the center of each treated area of each replication. This took a full day every time full day out in the orchard to get this accomplished with a pretty good crew. I think at one time we had 3, another time we had maybe as many as 5 people out there all day looking through these various trees and treatments. The treatments were made with Savage PTO driven air blast sprayer calibrated to deliver 100 gallons per acre. Only 1 application of an aphicide was made during the trial period. However, an additional weevil application was made after the test was completed on September 17th, 2018. Over the next 12 days, 5.2 inches, again, heavy rainfall occurred, and mean daily temperature was 75.1 with a high during the period of 95. All the rain seemed to have fallen during between September 2nd and the 9th, after which no rainfall occurred during the remainder of the test period. Oop. That's just give you an idea how it looked. So each little area, this is red is one treatment and green is another treatment, and they're scattered throughout this big orchard. And you can see there's several trees, so we could choose randomly within each block as to which tree we were taking our readings from. You can see based on the Pawnee pecans that we sampled, the populations were very high on the pre-treatment counts, maybe nearly 1,000 aphids per compound leaf. 1,000 aphids per compound leaf. And the various treatments did a fairly good job of controlling the aphids based on the silencer only treatments. So we've got pretty good management with most of those materials, and I would add that PQZ to that list in terms of controlling aphid infestations. By the end of the trial, the rains did a little bit to control the aphids in the what would be considered the Weevil insecticide only, or the silencer only treatment, but still they were well above all the other treatments. In the cans of pecans, this is where we saw incredible aphid numbers. These are huge leaves on these cans of pecans. And as you can see, we were looking at 4,500, 4,600 aphids per compound leaf, a tremendous population. And the insecticides did a very effective job in almost in every case, really, in controlling those aphids. And once again, the rains kind of brought the aphid populations under control in the silencer only treatments. The only one that kind of fell out as we went along was the carbine at the 2.4 ounce per acre rate. Other than that, the Movento and the closer did a fairly good job. And once again, I'll repeat that the PQZ is another nice alternative. And all of these treatments, Movento, carbine, closer, PQZ, all have a different IRAC number. So keep that in mind if you have aphid infestations during that weevil season and you have to control them more than once. Rotate those chemistries. Don't use the same chemistry every time. And that's what I have for you. Are there any questions?
Phil, I think we have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay, let me stop sharing here.
Sharon asks, does improving soil tilth in sandy soils help reduce pecan weevil population by making it harder for
make it harder for the beastly things to emerge? Yeah. Well, if you've got a tight clay soil, that might help a little bit with weevil emergence, but not worth the investment trying to do that. And that if it gets really tight, then you may have a moisture retention problem. So there's some trade-offs there. I would say just be happy with what you've got and learn how to manage it well based upon emergence in your particular orchard. Then the next question is this information available in written form? Yeah, most of the information except for the insecticide trials. Well, actually, we published the insecticide trials in the arthropod management tests, which are available online. But the information on weevils and aphids is available on our various fact sheets, and Becky can make those available for you, which she said in the next question or the next thing.
There's several different fact sheets that deal with the individual pests. There's a couple on weevil. There's one on pecan net case bearer. So you can take a look at that. And then the pecan insect and disease control also has suggestions for control.
Yeah, and at the OPGA meeting, I made available one, not really a fact sheet. It was a publication we did a few years back on pecan weevil biology and management. And that's I think it's an excellent publication that just tells you about that pecan weevil biology and management. And it's sort of the whole treatise of how to manage pecan weevils. Now, it doesn't cover some of those other things I talked about today, like aphids and chuckworm and so forth. And the other thing that I might add to the discussion is that although my discussion was primarily about pecan weevil and aphids, the job is not done until that product is in the shop, so kind of keep in mind, if you live in eastern Oklahoma near soybean fields and alfalfa fields, and maybe you have a lot of thistle nearby, things like stink bugs and leaf-footed bugs can continue to feed on those pecans, even though the pecans may be on the ground and you think, oh man, I've made it, all I got to do is pick them up now. No, stink bugs can feed right through a hardened shell. So if you have a situation like that, and we do have some growers that are in that situation in eastern Oklahoma near soybean fields, once that soybean field gets harvested, things like stink bugs will move in. So sort of keep those things in mind. It's not this is one of the late season pests that I've covered today, these two, the weevils and the aphids, but it's not the only late season pests.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate you coming in on your time off. You're on leave, and we'll be retiring next month. So appreciate you and all you've done to help out with all of the pecan meetings and the classes and everything. So we're going to miss you terribly. You'll have to join in just to say hi and be around so we can still keep in touch. So
okay. Thank you, Becky.
We really appreciate all you've done.
Thank you, and God bless everybody.
All right. All right, our last speaker is Dr. Lu Zhang, and she is going to talk about pecan development. So Lu, can you share your screen today?
Yes. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Hello everyone. Hello. How is the summer going? Everything's well? Okay, so here today my topic is nut development and irrigation management in summer. And my first slide here. You can see there are two pictures. The first picture shows a cluster of flowers. The second picture is a cluster of nuts. So our first section today we will discuss is how do we get nuts from flowers? And here, this is the flower structure. This is the single floret from one cluster. You can see this is a floret, right? And on the top, the fluffy big head, that is the structure is called a stigma. The stigma is the part that will accept pollen. So in the future, the pollen will germinate and penetrate the whole flowers until it reaches the ovule, that is the structure at the bottom. And we will further take a look at this part, the bottom of this flower here. So as we just mentioned, at the bottom, we have the fused ovary wall and the calyx. So this part, the inner layer, is called endocarp. So this part will develop into shell. The left part of the fused ovary wall and the calyx will develop into your shock, the pecan's shock. The very important part of this bottom tissue is the ovule. So you can see here, for the ovule, it has two parts. The first part, we call that embryo sac. So that is the structure in the future will develop into the kernel. Another part that is the layer that it is called integuments. This part will develop into the seed coat. So now we take a look at this one, this structure, embryo sac. And actually, when we take a further look at this structure, the embryo sac, it will develop into two parts again. The first part is called embryo. And for the embryo, we know the majority components of embryo is called cotyledon. This one will develop into the kernel. So that is the kernel is the part we eat, right? Another part, very important, that will develop from the embryo sac is called endosperm. So endosperm actually, they provide nutrition to your embryos, to your cotyledon. And this structure will disappear in the future. And then now, my question is, have you heard about water gel and those stages. Yes, definitely you know. But why do we call them water, gel, and those stages? This one. So from this picture, we just cut the nuts into half, and you can see there are some liquid inside the nuts, right? We know that is the reason we call the nuts is at the water stage. And actually, the reason we call that water stage is because endosperm is in a liquid status, liquid phase. And at this stage, the endosperm is free nucleate. Free nucleate, that means usually we know for the all plant cells, they have the cell membrane, they have the cell walls that outside of the cell structure, right? And for the free nucleate, that is a very spatial cell status. They do not have the cell walls, cell membranes. So that means that inside the contents, including cytoplasm, cell nucleus, those things, they can move freely. That makes this endosperm liquid phase. And then when, the nuts continue to develop, a layer of cellular endosperm will form from the free nucleate endosperm. So that means at this stage, we call that gel stage. At this stage, your endosperm starts to have the cell walls, the cell membranes. They can, include those cytoplasm, cell nucleus, and make this new endosperm in a solid phase. And then again, the dose stage. Very important part, the dose stage actually is the cotyledon. The cotyledon, starts to expand the full length of the ovule and get thicker and replace the cellular endosperm. So far you can see, we just mentioned the water, gel, and dose stages. Actually, for the water and gel stages, they reflect the status of your endosperm. And the dose stage, that is the status of your cotyledon, of the kernel. In 2019 and 2020, we continued to monitor the growth of the pecan nuts from the flowering to the harvest. We use the AI technology to detect and measure the areas of the shock of the shell and the embryo. And based on a lot of data, a large set of data, we made the model. This is a nut growth model of the pecan nuts. The green, the blue line is the shock. The green color stands for the shell, and the red one is the embryo. So you can see this is the growth curve of the Kansas cultivars in Pecans. And you take a look at this table, this graph, and you will see this. The highest growth rate for the pecan nuts is from the end of July through August. And we know here in Oklahoma, sometimes we are faced with drought condition in summer, right? So we would like to know, does the drought influence this growth curve, this normal growth curve? Does drought influence the water stage of our nuts? And also, for the seed coat, there is a theory that is, if you get the seed coat, if you get your nuts at a very early stage, at this stage, actually inside the seed coat, there is a pressure. So the theory is the increase in volume of liquid endosperm forces the enlargement of the seed coat. So that means at the water stage, the pressure inside the seed coat could determine the kernel size. So we can see the water stage, it seems like the water is very important, right? And supported by Oklahoma Pecan Growers Association, we conducted some preliminary research in 2019 and 2020. In 2019, we investigate our irrigation situation in our experiment orchard. We installed the watermark soil moisture sensors at the 6 and 30-inch depths in the orchard, and we measured the soil moisture tension. The soil moisture tension, that is a measurement of how tightly the water clings to the soil. The drier the soil, the greater the soil moisture tension. So usually the recommended value of the soil moisture tension should be less than 40. And we take a look at our table, our graph, and all of our value we tested in August is less than 30. So that means our irrigation is pretty good. But meanwhile, it also means our soil is fairly wet. So in 2020, we continue this preliminary research. We would like to know in the summer, if we control the irrigation, if that could influence the quality of the nuts, influence the yield of the tree. So in 2020, we did a small preliminary research. We gave 3 irrigation treatments to the trees. We gave them a current irrigation schedule. So at that last year, the current irrigation schedule is 48 hours irrigation at 0.73 gallon per minute, and the half irrigation schedule. So that means 24 hours per week irrigation. And the third group is without any irrigation. So with this treatment, we would like to know the reactions of the trees. We installed the valve. You can see here, the first picture, that is a valve we installed in a sprinkler and to control the irrigation. And the second picture is our 2 graduate students, Amandeep and Serena. They are testing the water potential of the trees. So stem water potential, that is our direct method in evaluating the tree water status. They are using, you can see here, this is the pressure chamber. We are using this device to test the stem water potential. And as a result here, this graph shows the stem water potential we tested in the pony cultivar, and we tested once a week. The red dots is a full irrigation. The green dots is a half irrigation. The blue is a non-irrigation treatment control. And you can see at the beginning of August, so here, another thing is the higher the value means the less water is present in the trees, means the higher the value, the thirsty the trees. So you can see at the beginning of August, our 3 treatments, the value is low. That means they still have water. And here, at the end of August, the treatment, the bloom dots, without the irrigation, you can see the value is pretty high. So that means at this stage, the trees is really short of water. And very interesting is on August 30, in our orchard, the trees received 1 inch of rain. And then immediately, the trees water stench, the stem water potential decreased. So this result, reveals an inch of rain in summer that can largely elevate the drought stress of the trees. And also it gives us a clue that 1 or 2 supplementary irrigation events that could make a reasonable difference in the nut production and the tree health. Another, some other results is we compared the nut quality compared to the non-irrigation trail. Our the nuts in the full irrigation trail has more bright colors. And also the non-irrigation trail shows a very poor yield, very low yield compared to the full and half irrigation schedules. So as a conclusion here, that is our experiment that highlights the importance of the summer irrigation on nut quality and production. But however, since we didn't see the huge difference of the yield in the half irrigation trail, so that means the proper water reduction could be viable for some orchards. Okay, so that's all for my today's topic. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Does anyone have a question for Lou about the development or the water stress or added benefits of irrigation to development? Have any questions about her study that she did?
Okay, so actually I have a question. Is regarding at the beginning, Becky mentioned the mechanical thinning, the fruit thinning at the beginning. So I would like to ask how many of you are using the mechanical thinning in your orchard or used the mechanical thinning in your orchard?
You can either include something in the chat or unmute if you'd like to say yes or no.
Or maybe later in the future, I can send the emails to ask about this question.
In the survey, maybe we can add a question about that, Lou.
Yes, that would be great.
All right, well, thank you today.
Well, I got one quick question for Lou as well.
Yes.
The differences when you're doing your irrigation treatments, did you see any differences in water split between any of the treatments? Where you had non-irrigated plus irrigated, was there any difference in water split, or did you not have any water split last year?
The water split?
Yeah, water split's a condition where it splits the shell open when you get too much water and it causes the shell to rupture.
No,
we see it a lot in
see.
a coney down here in the southern part of the state. I've seen it in the coney in several orchards in the past. But I was just wondering if you saw any differences between the different water treatments that you did.
No, we didn't see that situation, and I think a part of the reason is we still used the full irrigation is the normal irrigation schedule. We didn't over irrigate them. We just reduced the irrigation.
So, Lou, I had a question. Do you think that 1 inch of rainfall on a clay soil would have given you as much benefit as on those sandy soils at Perkins?
Might be. I'm not very sure about that one. And I just say, we didn't do the treatment to different soil type, but I believe that could help because you still have the water there, right? That could help the roots to absorb more water.
Okay. All right. Well, any other questions for Lou today? Charlie, would you like to add anything that you're seeing down in the southern part of the state? Any comments?
Just for the people spraying their fungicides, just like Phil was saying on the insecticides, continue to rotate your chemistries. I've talked with a couple of growers that they'd sprayed a three consecutive sprays. They changed chemicals, but they were still spraying the same class all 3 times. So even though they were switching the trade name of the chemical, they were still spraying a three consecutive times. So they got chastised a little bit by me, but just to remind people to make sure you're rotating those chemistries. I mean, that's how we keep, chemicals available for use on pecans, is by protecting those chemicals by doing good rotations and everything. So just be aware that even though you may switch trade names, make sure you look at that either FRAC number or IRAC number on those insecticides and fungicides, and make sure you're rotating your chemistry as well.
Are you seeing a lot of scab lesions on leaves and shucks right now?
Right now, not on the shucks. There has been some scab on leaves in a number of different orchards, and I've gotten calls from growers concerned because they do have a little bit of scab on leaves, and so they're wanting to make sure they give good protection on those nuts that they're sizing right now and everything to try and protect those as well as they can. A little bit of feeding on some leaves here and there, some grasshopper damage, especially on some younger trees and some things like that. But a couple out of the ordinary things that Phil would have been excited to find, probably like one's a robin moth. I found some very large caterpillars in the orchard there where they were feeding those get up to 5 inches long, and so the grower was a little bit frightened when he ran across those eating their young pecan leaves. But like I say, so just some general feeding here and there on some different insects and a few webworms popping up in some unmanaged, or those that didn't do PNC sprays and stuff, some webworms showing up here and there, 10 caterpillars, but nothing really out of the ordinary so far.
Well, thank you. It's good to hear what's happening in different areas. Lou, there was a question. It's how did Perkins determine their full irrigation amount? How was that?
It's a really good question. So here is our experimental orchard. We still follow the traditional irrigation schedule. So that is, we just give some water like 48 hours each week with the micro sprinklers. It's very traditional ones. And according to some literature reviews, they recommend like in Oklahoma, 8 inches per month for the summer for the pecan trees. But what I would like to say is we are working on this one. We are working on the irrigation schedule. We are planning to use we are working with the irrigation expert at OSU, and we are trying to make the irrigation schedules. So I think in the next few years, we could provide some updates of how we will schedule the irrigation instead of using this traditional irrigation ways.
Was that all right for you, Laura, your answer? Is that what you needed? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, that was fine. Any other questions for any of our speakers today? All right, if you have specific topics that you'd like to hear about in the upcoming months, you can email me or send me a message on Facebook or give me a call, and we can try to handle some of the questions that you may have or address some of the topics that you're interested in. Next month, we will be covering crop load management. Not everyone may need to be doing this procedure this year, but there are areas that are going to be having large crops and may benefit from removing part of that crop. So we'll talk about that and some other issues as we come up on August. But I appreciate Phil and Lou and Charlie for joining us today, and appreciate all of you for joining us as well. And like I said, if you have any questions, reach out. I can get you in touch with our different speakers if you're interested, and if you have questions about anything. But appreciate it, and we will see you next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Becky.
Thanks, Lou.